Resto mods are everywhere these days, I swear. Somebody launched a new version of the Lancia 037 at the Festival of Speed. Singer keep doing things to Porsche 911s. We've even filmed recently with Alphaholics and Eagle and Thornley Kelham. But those are all classic cars, the kind of unobtainable things that people will never own. What if someone decided to fiddle with a people's hero, the kind of car that was built in low numbers that people love? There'd be riots. Better not tell them about this then.
This is the BMW E30 M3 by Redux. It is, according to the team that makes it, an E30 M3 that's been made just slightly better in basically every way. The engine, that's better. Suspension, that too. Looks, yep, those. Interior, even that. The thing is, the E30 isn't just another M car. It's not the 18th in line to the M3 throne. The E30 is numero uno, the daddy, the first M3 of all. And not just that, it's a homologation special, a car designed to go boxy DTM racing to take on Mercedes. From 1986 to 1991, only around 17,000 were made, and it became the most successful DTM car of all time while becoming an icon on the road. Fiddling with one now, especially on the eve of BMW's anniversary year, well, that's bold.
So the E30 M3 was pretty special then, it turned out. But what if there was a company that decided now was the time to start fiddling with E30s, to make a modern version of one? Well, let me introduce you to Redux. This is the Redux E30 M3. And the basic concept here is to take what made the E30 M3 great and just make every single part incrementally just a little bit better. It's not a ground-up redesign. They've just tried to sort of make it as if the E30 was a car being built today. Think of this as the next step. Think of it as a BMW E30 M3 CSL. Now, so much has actually been done to this car that it would take me far too long to read out to you everything that's in this booklet. But the basics are that it now has new suspension with Bilstein dampers, better brakes, you can get carbon options. The engine has been taken, stripped to pieces, most of that thrown away, and started again. The interior is new, it's got carbon fibre body panels, there's a lot of new things here. In fact, let me explain. The changes to this are quite subtle, but many. Firstly, we can start with the rear wing, which looks like it always has done, but has some changes. At the back, it's very slightly 30mm shorter than it was before, and at the front 20, giving it a slightly flatter feel. There's also now an adjustable section at the rear which has 3 different settings. The rear bumper has changed a little bit, and the reason for that change to the rear wing is to make sure, and this is quite particular, to make sure that that gap there matches that gap there, and it all looks a little bit more like it probably should have done. The bumper has changed and the angle down here has changed to mean that it matches the run all the way down the side of the car. The wheels are now 18 inches and they are based on an original BBS rim that was used in the DTM, except rather than being concave, they're now flat. And also in the middle, there's some lovely self-stabilizing BMW logos. The sills, they're flatter than they were before. They're not any bigger, but it actually makes them look a lot bigger than the original ones did. The arches are rounder, helping those 18-inch BBS wheels to fill them properly. They look a lot better than they did before. If you'd fitted 18-inch wheels to the original car with its flatter arches, you had to put in quite a lot of negative camber, which you don't really want when you're driving a car day to day. Then there's the box of the arch, which is deeper to fit those underneath, and it gives the car a little bit more of the DTM feel, the car that you remember really racing in the 90s. Basically everything is carbon fibre. We've got carbon fibre here, we've got carbon fibre here, all over the place. And the body panels weigh around 46 kilograms in total, which is extraordinary. There's even a quite frankly stunning carbon fibre splitter down the front, and then you've got some beautiful modern lights. Then, rather than splatter their name all over the place, Redux have just left it very subtle. You've got the tiniest little badge there and another one repeating that at the back. And then there's perhaps the masterpiece of this car, which can be found under the bonnet. The engine is very similar to the original one in the E30 M3, except it's now 2.5 litres, which is the same size as the E30 Sport Evo was. That said, pretty much every part has been thrown away and bespoke parts have been made to create it. This, though, may be the prettiest engine bay that I have ever seen. Everything has been tidied away. The arches have been shaved down to create more space. There's been custom reservoirs made for the oil, for the coolant. They've even moved the washer fluid to the back to make more space.
Redux says that over 4,000 man-hours goes into each of its M3 builds. The S14 engine is stripped back so far, it barely resembles the original. It's given a billet aluminium block, a BMW Motorsport crankshaft, new cam profile 95mm pistons, and then, that they say is key, a complete engine remap and improved electronics. There's also a new lighter weight flywheel to allow the engine to rev to its 8,000 RPM limiter faster. And to be precise about that engine, the block, head and sump are the retain bits. They are all ice blasted, and then the engine is rebuilt to a new bespoke spec that Redux calls S14 B25. The use of aluminium, which seems almost a fetish for Redux, doesn't just help to reduce weight, it also carries heat from the engine much better than iron.
Inside, there are just as many changes, but they're all just as subtle. To first look at this interior, you might not necessarily know that anything has changed, but once you look at it, you can see the subtle differences. It starts in front of you on the dash, where there's no longer a row of lights sitting down the bottom. In fact, in very, very faint letters, there's the word Redux, but nothing major. Those have been moved into the center to just clean everything up. There's also this beautiful little LCD display up here. You can have one in front of you if you really want, but I think that's so much nicer, and you can decide what you want on there. Around where there used to be buttons and everywhere else, there's now billeted aluminium, which is just delightful. It looks beautiful. Everything in here looks fantastic. There's billet aluminium on the pedals, and they would very much like you to know that the golf ball gear stick is an original BMW part. It's got nothing to do with the Golf GTI. Now, the original E30 M3 had about 200 horsepower from a 2.3 litre four-cylinder engine. Then the boffins at the M division took that and enlarged it to 2.5 litres to create the Sport Evo with about 235 horsepower. The thing is, today, 230 horsepower is, well, it's a bit weedy, isn't it? So this car has 300 horsepower and about 280 newton meters of torque. So think of this as the next step. Think of it as a Sport Evo. The key thing as well is the weight loss that's happened. Redux hasn't actually weighed this car yet, but they reckon that the original car is around 1,200 kilograms, and this one has probably lost in the region of 50. So it's around 1,150 kilograms, which makes a difference because it means that the power to weight ratio is now around 260 horsepower per ton. To put that into perspective, the current BMW M4 competition has a power to weight ratio of just 290. So it's not far off. 300 horsepower has actually been chosen for a reason as well. Redux think that's more than enough than you'll ever need. And in fact, if you step out of pretty much any modern hot hatch into this, it'll feel around the same.
It should be noted that the very first M3 Redux did have more power, at about 370 horsepower, as it was turbocharged and would ping its way around to a near 9,500 RPM redline. But that car was built for one very specific owner who only ever wanted to take it on a track.
As you can imagine, the idea of a turbocharged E30 got Redux a little bit of criticism. And that's fine, because A, it's deserved, and B, none of the rest of the cars will be turbocharged. That was for one specific owner who wanted one very specific car. The rest of them will stay naturally aspirated, as they should do. This one is based on a Japanese spec car and therefore has the dogleg gearbox, as all Japanese and European and British spec cars had that. The American car had the normal H-pattern gearbox, but the Euro spec car and Japanese is the one being used here. It has Bilstein dampers as standard, although you can go up to something a little bit more racy if you really want, although I'm not 100% sure there's any reason to. The point of this car is to try and feel a little bit like an old Group A racing car, like the cars that the E30 were, but one that you'd actually like to drive every day. not just on a track. So I don't know that you'd ever want it to be anything more than it is. Also, everything will be tuned specifically for the customer. So the whole car will basically be built around you. It'll be your E30. But enough about the numbers. What really matters is how it drives. And I'm very pleased to report that the answer to that is good. Very, very good. This car is an absolute masterpiece. It really is an old-fashioned car made to feel just a tiny bit old modern, but without ruining the way that it feels. The balance on this car is absolutely joyous. It's perfect. We started driving today in really wet conditions, and you go out in something a little bit old and you might be perhaps a tiny bit fearful that you're driving a £300,000 car on some very wet conditions, but it's not. It's friendly, it's happy, it's inviting, it just wants to drive with you. There is a teeny little bit of understeer as you turn in, but apparently there used to be more. They've dialed in a little bit of extra camber, and that has pulled out most of the understeer. So that can be fixed very quickly with a little lift from the throttle, which can, if you want, bring the back end round as well. It doesn't feel humongously powerful in 2021, but just listen to that noise that it makes when you do put your foot down. You've got to work to drive this car, but it's so good. And then everything else around here just works nicely. It doesn't feel like they've done too much. It doesn't feel like they've tried to create something super modern when it shouldn't have been. It just feels nice. Having the temperature gauge and everything up there, just a little flick of the eye to see that everything's okay. It's fantastic. While that engine sounds fantastic and delivers its power beautifully, I do think it is the rest of this car that is the real masterpiece. The chassis is absolutely wonderful. It really is the car you can kind of push on. You can turn in with a little bit of throttle, lift off just to correct that understeer that comes, and it will just turn, and then you can leave the throttle on and just bring it round in an almost telepathic manner in the way that it just works between you and the car. I know it's a £300,000 car, but you come into hearing that they're going to fiddle with a car like an E30 M3 and you get a little bit concerned. You worry that they're going to have done too much, tried to make it a completely different car. Oh no, this feels like it's worth every single penny that's been poured into it. And Simon and his team at Redux, they've put in something like 6 years of effort to get to this point after the idea first began to come into their heads. And it really shows. This car is a labour of love, and it feels like a labour of love. Every detail of this car has been thought out and agonised and thought about. And that's why it feels so good to drive, and why you can jump into this car and it'll barely take you a couple of miles before you feel like you've been driving it for almost all of your life.
It's not all good news, of course. That carbon airbox is brilliantly loud, always, so it will get tiresome. The semi-racing clutch isn't exactly completely friendly, and some of the carpet kept coming up under my foot. Also, despite its boost to 300 horsepower, it still doesn't feel that fast in a straight line. If that all sounds like the pickiest of nitpicks, it's because the Redux has a price, and it's £350,000. So we think we're on pretty solid ground pointing out some small flaws.
It is just a happy, shouty little noise box that will lap and lap and lap and lap and lap, and then, because it's a modern car as well, it'll calm down. Then it's got USB-C sockets, and it's got a modern radio that's been designed to look older. You can drive home happy and relaxed, and then you know what? You'll walk away from this thing and you won't be able to stop looking at it and you won't be able to stop smiling.